Ladies and gentlemen, there's a certain kind of silence that surrounds a woman who lives alone. It is not the silence of loneliness, nor is it the silence of defeat. It is a silence of presence, a powerful, inward-facing strength that does not need constant validation. To live alone as a woman in this world is not an act of rebellion. It is an act of return, a return to oneself. Because at some point, she began to understand that her life does not begin when someone else arrives. Her life began when she stopped waiting. A woman who lives alone is not incomplete. She is self-defined and self-sufficient. This truth is often misunderstood, not because it is complex, but because it challenges long-held assumptions about what it means to be whole. From an early age, society feeds us stories that suggest a woman's value is somehow tied to her attachment to others, especially to a man. She's portrayed as waiting, as searching, as incomplete until found or claimed. But a woman who lives alone tells a different story, not in defiance, but in quiet demonstration of a different kind of completeness. Her completeness is not found in isolation, but in wholeness. She does not see herself as a half in search of another half. She sees herself as a full person with layers, contradictions, strengths, and softness that exist regardless of anyone else's presence. Her identity is not created through comparison. It is forged through deep self-observation and honest confrontation with her own nature. She knows her habits, her reactions, her patterns, not just the ones others see, but the ones that only arise when no one else is around. That knowledge of self becomes her foundation. Living alone allows her the space to define what kind of life suits her, rather than adapting to someone else's expectations. She arranges her space to reflect her values, her pace, her rhythms. Her morning routine is hers alone. Her meals are made the way she prefers. The books on her shelf are chosen, not gifted. Her days are not filled with performance, but with presence. In a world that often demands women to shapeshift in order to be accepted, her choice to remain rooted in herself is a quiet act of courage. Self-sufficiency is not the absence of need. It is the presence of capability. She does not deny her human emotions. She still feels desire, hope, disappointment, and longing, but she is not ruled by them. She knows how to meet her needs in healthy, grounded ways. She can soothe herself in moments of uncertainty. She can create joy without relying on someone else to bring it to her. She does not avoid connection, but she no longer fears solitude. That balance is not easily taught. It is lived, practiced, and earned over time. There are practical elements to this self-sufficiency as well. She learns to manage the day-to-day responsibilities of life without waiting for someone else to step in. She handles her finances, her decisions, her challenges, and while she may ask for help when needed, she does not feel powerless without it. Her independence is not a mask. It is a lived experience. She is competent not to impress others, but because competence brings freedom. It allows her to move through the world with confidence that is grounded in real ability, not external praise. The woman who lives alone is often in deeper touch with her instincts. She has had time to listen, really listen, to her inner world without the constant noise of other people's opinions. She begins to trust her gut, to respect her own intuition. She no longer needs to ask for permission to follow her truth. This doesn't mean she is inflexible. On the contrary, she can adapt, but she does so on her terms, not from a place of dependency. People may wonder if she is lonely, if she is waiting, if she is somehow missing out. But what they often don't understand is that she is not lacking anything essential. She has built a life that reflects who she truly is, not a life curated to fit someone else's frame. And in doing so, she has found something rare, not just comfort in solitude, but the realization that she is and always was enough on her own. Her solitude reflects strength, not loneliness. It is a conscious return to self. It is a decision made with clarity, not born from bitterness or rejection. To live alone as a woman in a world that often equates partnership with success is to step outside of the script that many follow without question. She does not retreat into solitude as a last resort. She enters it with intention, knowing it is the only space where she can truly hear herself think, where she can explore her own nature without interference or distortion. The outside world often misunderstands solitude, mistaking it for lack. But solitude, for a woman who chooses it, becomes a container for transformation. Without the noise of constant companionship or the pressure to adapt to others, she begins to uncover the layers of her own being. She sees what she values, what she fears, what she dreams of. These realizations are not always comfortable, but they are necessary. In the absence of distraction, truth surfaces. Strength does not always look like action. Sometimes it looks like stillness, like the quiet confidence to stay with one's own company and not flee from it. There's strength in resisting the urge to fill every silence with noise, every empty space with another person. In solitude, she faces herself without a mirror held by someone else. That self-confrontation, though often overlooked, is one of the deepest forms of courage. It is not about perfection. It is about presence. Being present with oneself, with all that is unresolved, unpolished, and unknown. This return to self is not a regression, but a reclamation. Over time, many women are conditioned to prioritize the needs, emotions, and opinions of others before their own. Solitude becomes a space where she reverses that conditioning. It allows her to ask questions she was once too busy or too distracted to consider. What do I want truly? What brings me peace, not just momentary relief? What kind of life feels meaningful to me, not just socially acceptable? These questions are not always answered quickly, but asking them is a beginning of real freedom. Her strength is quiet, steady, and often invisible to those who define strength through dominance or display. It's the strength of staying instead of running, of observing instead of reacting. In solitude, she learns to pause before responding, to discern before engaging, to trust her own internal compass. This strength does not shout. It does not demand recognition. It simply is a foundation beneath her choices, a calm beneath her storms. She is not disconnected from others, but she is no longer dependent on them for emotional grounding. Her relationships become clearer in solitude. She begins to see who adds to her life and who drains it. Without the pull of constant interaction, she can evaluate her connections through a lens of truth, rather than habit or fear of being alone. She sees which bonds are authentic and which were built on convenience or compromise. Solitude doesn't push people away. It filters the ones worth keeping close. There is also a rhythm in her solitude, one that syncs with her own nature rather than the demands of another. She eats when she is hungry, sleeps when she is tired, speaks when she feels moved to, and rests in silence when she does not. This freedom is not about doing whatever she wants. It is about aligning her actions with her internal state. In that alignment, she finds integrity, and integrity gives her peace. While others may search for strength and validation, she has found it in self-knowledge. Solitude has taught her what cannot be learned in crowds. That being with oneself is not a punishment, but a privilege. It is the place where her energy is no longer scattered, but gathered, where she no longer needs to explain, perform, or adjust. She simply is. And in that being, she stands firm. She sets boundaries and values authentic connection over superficial companionship. This choice is not made out of pride or fear, but from a place of deep clarity. When a woman has lived alone long enough to understand her own patterns, rhythms, and emotional needs, she no longer feels compelled to invite everyone in. She becomes selective, not because she thinks others are beneath her, but because she has come to recognize the cost of allowing the wrong energies into her life. Her boundaries are not walls meant to isolate her. They are filters, guiding her toward what is real and away from what is merely convenient or fleeting. In a world that often celebrates constant availability and emotional overextension, her boundaries may seem strange to others. People might say she's distant, guarded, or too particular. But what they don't see is how much energy it takes to maintain false connections. She has learned the difference between being alone and feeling alone in a room full of people. That lesson taught her that presence without authenticity is a kind of emotional starvation. And so, she chooses depth over volume. Fewer conversations, but more meaningful ones. Fewer people, but stronger connections. When she sets boundaries, she is not trying to control others. She is simply choosing to protect her own well-being. She knows what it feels like to be drained by relationships where her needs were secondary, where her voice was quieted, or where her value was tied to how much she gave. She no longer entertains dynamics that require her to shrink. She no longer says yes to things that disrupt her peace. Her time, her space, her energy. These are no longer things she offers out of guilt or fear. They are given from a place of intention. Authentic connection to her is not based on frequency, but on resonance. It's not about how often someone shows up. It's about how real they are when they do. She values conversations that are not just polite, but honest. Relationships where disagreement is welcomed, not feared. Bonds where vulnerability is not seen as weakness, but as a pathway to trust. These are the spaces where she feels safe enough to bring her full self, not just the polished parts, but the complicated, changing human parts. Living alone has sharpened her understanding of herself, and with that understanding comes discernment. She can sense when someone's presence uplifts her or drains her. She can feel when she's being seen versus when she's being used. She no longer entertains attention for the sake of filling silence. Her silence is already full of thought, of reflection, of creative energy. So anyone who steps into her world must add to it, not pull from it without giving back. This level of clarity can make others uncomfortable, especially those who are used to blurred lines and unspoken expectations. But she does not compromise just to keep peace. She knows that peace bought at the expense of her own truth is not peace at all. Her boundaries are not punishments. They are expressions of self-respect. They say, I know who I am, and I will not bend just to be accepted. That firmness does not come from stubbornness, but from the experience of having once given too much, too easily. Superficial companionship no longer satisfies her. She does not fear solitude, so she does not chase connections that feel hollow. She would rather spend an evening alone than in the company of someone who does not truly see her. This is not a rejection of others, but an honoring of herself. She knows the value of her presence and offers it only where it can be met with equal sincerity. In doing so, she creates space not just for protection, but for something richer to emerge. Relationships that are rooted in mutual respect, shared truth, and emotional integrity. Her independence is earned through experience, reflection, and inner growth. It is not something that appeared overnight or arrived without struggle. It was built slowly, often through moments that tested her patience, her confidence, and her resilience. Each time she was overlooked, underestimated, or misunderstood, she was given an opportunity to choose. Either bend to the expectations of others or rise into her own strength. With time, she stopped seeking permission to exist fully. She began to realize that the power she was looking for in others had always been hers to claim. There were seasons when her independence felt like isolation. In the beginning, she might have questioned whether standing on her own was a sign of strength or stubbornness. There were days when the weight of making every decision alone felt overwhelming. But instead of running from those moments, she sat with them. She let the discomfort shape her. She asked herself difficult questions and allowed the answers to come in silence. Through this process, she learned that the hardest lessons are often the most transformative. They force you to become someone you didn't know you could be. She grew tired of relying on people who were inconsistent, tired of shrinking herself to be more palatable, tired of trying to fit into spaces that never felt like home. And from that exhaustion came a new clarity. If she was going to find peace, she would have to stop outsourcing her stability to other people. She would have to build something solid within herself. That meant learning skills she had once believed were beyond her. It meant confronting fears she had avoided. It meant proving to herself over and over again that she was capable of carrying her own life. Reflection became her teacher. She began to see patterns in her relationships, in her choices, in her thoughts. Not all of them were easy to acknowledge, but the more she faced herself, the more she understood her own motives. She could see when she was acting from fear, when she was seeking validation, when she was abandoning herself to be accepted. And with this self-awareness came power. Because once she understood her patterns, she could change them. And with each change, her independence grew deeper, more rooted, more unshakable. Her growth was not loud. There were no grand announcements, no dramatic reinventions. It was quiet, steady, and deeply personal. Some people in her life didn't notice the shift at first. Others resisted it. They preferred the version of her who said yes too often, who softened her truth to keep the peace. But she could no longer afford to abandon herself for the comfort of others. Growth had changed her priorities. It had taught her that self-respect is not optional, that boundaries are not rude, that needing time alone is not a flaw. These realizations restructured her life from the inside out. She no longer feared being alone because she had met herself in the quietest moments. She had listened to her own thoughts long enough to trust them. She had held herself through sadness, celebrated herself in joy, and found contentment in her own company. That kind of relationship with the self cannot be faked. It cannot be given by anyone else. It must be earned through deliberate inner work, the kind of work most people avoid because it requires brutal honesty and sustained commitment. There's a deep wisdom that comes from living this way. She knows that independence doesn't mean rejecting others. It means not depending on them to define her. She can love without clinging, give without depleting, and walk away without bitterness when something no longer serves her. Her life is no longer built on the shaky foundation of others' approval. It is built on the solid ground of self-knowledge, self-trust, and self-honoring. That is why her independence feels so unshakable. Because it is not just a state of being. It is a result of everything she has lived through, learned from, and risen beyond. She redefines love, not as dependency, but as something that expands her, not confines her. Through solitude and self-discovery, she has learned that love is not meant to be a cage or a cure. It is not supposed to fill a void or complete her story. She no longer seeks someone to rescue her from herself or give her life meaning. She has already done the work to understand that love should be a complement to wholeness, not a remedy for brokenness. And in understanding that, she has shifted the way she approaches relationships entirely. In her earlier years, she might have been drawn to the idea of romantic love as a destination, a place to arrive at and settle into. But time, experience, and reflection have shown her that love, when built on dependency, can become a subtle form of self-abandonment. It can lead to choices made from fear rather than truth. She remembers what it felt like to compromise too much, to silence her voice in order to be accepted, to tolerate what didn't align with her values just to avoid being alone. That kind of love was draining. It left her feeling more empty than fulfilled. Now, she recognizes that real love must allow space. Space to grow, space to evolve, space to breathe. It must be strong enough to withstand truth, flexible enough to allow change, and deep enough to welcome individuality. She no longer seeks fusion. She seeks resonance. She understands that love is not about becoming one with another person, but about walking alongside each other with awareness and respect. She is not afraid to be separate, to stand on her own, to maintain her identity even in intimacy. Her definition of love is rooted in freedom, not fear. She believes that two people can deeply care for one another without needing to possess or control. She believes in connection that uplifts rather than restrains, that brings clarity rather than confusion. Love, to her, is not about constantly being together, but about knowing that you are supported even in your solitude. It's about feeling safe enough to show up fully, not having to shrink or perform to keep the connection alive. She approaches love from a place of inner fullness. Because she does not need someone to make her feel whole. She does not demand that another person be her everything. She appreciates emotional presence, honesty, and mutual growth over grand gestures or dependency. She would rather be alone than tied to someone who expects her to sacrifice her essence for the sake of the relationship. This clarity gives her peace. It protects her from confusing intensity with intimacy, chaos with passion, or control with care.